Samantha Mowat. I'm a clairvoyant psychic and a contactee, and I think today I'd like to talk to you about something that I don't think is really talked about very much in ufology. I'd like to talk to you about starseeds. Now, when we look at the concept of starseeds, many of us think of ourselves, the teenager through adult generations of starseeds. And when we think about that component, it's wonderful to acknowledge what kind of starseed you are in a lot of ways. A lot of us typically only identify as one, possibly two types, when in actuality we can actually be several different types of beings that are comprised into this wonderful little form. They can all be existing simultaneously all across the universe on multiple dimensional planes. Right now you could be having an incarnation as a Pleiadian or a reptilian or perhaps an Apollonian or someone from Mintaka, or you could be a Syrian being. You might be swimming in the oceans of Sirius right now. You might be having an incarnation on an elemental type world where you have lots of elementals and plants and types of things of that nature. You could also be having a simultaneous incarnation as an angelic being or a light being. And those are all really wonderful. But when you start to get a better idea about your soul and who you are, that's really great. But you also have to think about the fact of what the souls of the people around you are, in particular if you have children. So when I look at my soul in some of the places that I know that I've incarnated into, I know I've been an elemental, I know I've been a gray, I know I've been a Pleiadian before, I know I've been a Lyran before, I know that I have been an angelic type being before. These are things that I know my soul has been. And in some ways that has helped making the parenting for my children a lot easier, because I do have some overlapping lifetimes with them where we've had common background. But in some situations it can actually be really difficult. And it's like you'll look at who you are and what's going, it's like, this is how I parent and this is how I did things as a kid, and then you'll have a child that is a completely different soul origin than you, like, oh my goodness, I can't relate, I don't understand, I don't know how to handle this component of you. And that's part of what I want you to understand with this. I want for you to take into consideration is getting to know not only who your soul is, but if you have children, whether it's your children that are small or even grandchildren or children in your family, it's very common for starseeds to be incarnating on the planet right now, and for us to really take that time to get to know who they are on a soul level. That way we can better help navigate them in these changing and kind of turbulent times. It's a really interesting energetic dynamic out there right now. We've got so many energies that are going all over the place, from stress and anger to revolutions occurring to the energies just shifting as a whole. And so why that's so relevant is when I look at my children, I look at how their energies are being impacted so very differently from one another, as well as from a lot of the other students that they're going to school with. So I want you to take this into consideration. If you're looking at the starseed quizzes that are available online, or if you feel a certain draw towards a particular solar system or planetary system, really stop and think about it. Does this resonate with me? Does this feel homey to me? Do I feel like an aspect of my consciousness has a longing to go to that place? And if it does, that's fine. That's wonderful. Write it down, put it in your journal, just kind of get an awareness for it. And as you go through your life, keep taking note of other places that you have a connection to. It could be a past life connection to places on the earth or particular time periods, whether it's like the Middle Egypt or ancient Egypt, ancient Rome, Mesopotamia, Atlantis, Mu. You might feel drawn towards the turn of the last century, or you might feel drawn towards China or different Aboriginal tribes. And you might be like, well, I sense Aboriginal energy and I feel a connection to Aboriginal culture, but I don't know which one really. In which case, take some time. Get to know all of them. Figure out whether you're really resonating with the North American Aboriginals, or the ones as far north as the Inuit, or the Prairies Aboriginals, or the ones along the coastline. Discover if you're more connected to the Aboriginals around Australia, or the ones that are towards South America. Really get to know where you're feeling more connected to. You might even feel more connected towards, well, I feel connected to Europe, and particularly Italy in the Renaissance times. That could be somewhere you feel connected to. Or I feel, if, for instance, you might have like a different aspect of the Italian and Roman type energy that you're drawn to. You might feel more drawn to Italy, or not Italy, pardon me, the Roman aspect of the Italian history. So really getting to know not only what geographical regions you're feeling connected to here on Earth, but also getting to know the ones that you're feeling drawn to outside of this planet. And when you're looking at these components and why it relates to your children and the beings that you're helping to navigate on this planet, is there's a couple things you want to take into consideration. If you know who you are and you recognize the tools of how to have a better understanding of your soul, you have a better sense of awareness of how to parent and love those that you are now guiding and helping to shape. With my children, I've really got a good idea over the last 20 years of who I am and where I've incarnated and the types of things that my soul has done that were wonderful and things that I've done that were definitely not so wonderful and that I learned from, as well as my traumas, my past life blockages, as well as really getting to know the family and genetic patterns that are passed on from my great grandparents to my grandparents to my parents through me, and trying to break those generational trends before they get to my children. And how this is all interconnected is if you are like me and you are someone who is trying to parent a child who has a completely different overall soul patterning than your own, you can feel very drawn to that child. You can still really love that child, but your motivation and reasoning and the ways in which you choose to handle particular situations can be so very different from those children. For instance, one of my children is really connected towards Sirius and the Orion star system. She feels very drawn to Lyra, whereas my other child is so very different from me. Yes, he and I have a few lifetimes in common where we both have been Pleiadians before, but he has more of a drawn towards some of the mantis and reptilian energy, as well as the Orion system. And the Orion star system is very big. When people think Orions, they just think the Orion Greys, not realizing there's actually a lot of different civilizations that are within the Orion star system. It's almost like saying, I'm Canadian. It's like, well, that's great, but we're in Canada. And Canada's comprised of so many different cultures, and a lot of different beings come here from other places to almost like reestablish themselves. And so you really have to get to know what your soul is drawn to. And so what I'm trying to have you understand with this is when I'm looking at the components of raising a starseed like my daughter, who I have a lot in common with, she and I can stop and sit and talk, and I can feel a more of an energetic system and level about how she's feeling. And if she feels there's something off with my energy system, she'll can put a hand on me and place it on my arm or something and be like, I felt like you needed me to send you energy. And she'll end up sending energy into my body. She feels like something's off, or she'll ask me to rebalance her energy system. And this in part is related to the Lyra star system, because when we look at the way in which a lot of the humanoids are, they can be very compassionately based, they can be very psychically focused, more in tuned on an energetic level, more with their empathic and claircognizant abilities. So the empath, of course, representing the ability to connect into emotions, the sensing with your body, the vibratory differences being emitted by others. As you know, we all have an aura, and yes, the auras emit colors, but more importantly, they emit frequency. And those frequencies hold everything from emotion to trauma, to pain, to an exuberance of energy, to a diminishing of energy. There's so many different components in place. And so when she feels like my energy system is either cloudy or it's close to my body, she reminds me to take my time to do breath work, to do meditation, to really expand the auric field, which for me is very helpful. Now, whereas my other child, which has a very different soul understanding from me, I know I've had a lifetime or two where I've been reptilian, and I've lived alongside of them many lifetimes, and that's wonderful because it has helped me to better understand them, and that's part of the reason why I'm in a hybridization program with them in this lifetime, is because I do have some lifetimes where I can better understand their culture, their perspective, things of that nature. And so because I haven't had a tremendous amount of lifetimes with them, though, I don't quite understand a lot of their motives necessarily. I don't quite understand the desire to move towards things that are more almost militant, the draw towards things like espionage, war, things like weaponry, things like that. I don't necessarily feel as strong of a pull towards. I don't feel the need to really get to know the different forms of like battle techniques and strategy, things of that nature just aren't interesting to me. Whereas some of the other components of their culture I find very fascinating. I really enjoy their structure, their order. I appreciate the fact that they are better organized and recognize the strengths of different people and things like that. That I can appreciate. And so when I look at that and I compare it to the mantis aspect of this child's soul. And I look at the fact of how with the mantis beings, they're highly telepathic, they're very sensitive to sound and vibration. It's not as much of, I don't think it's as much of an empathic understanding, so much as a claircognizant understanding. The difference, of course, being the empath can walk into a room, be like, okay, well, this person over here is lying, and this person over here is going through depression, and this person over here is lovely, and this person is either going to be getting a promotion soon, or that person over here is feeling jubilant. See, there's that recognition of not only the emotional aspect of people, but there's also the component of recognizing some of the events taking place in their life. That's what I'm talking about. Whereas with the mantis beings, they're more looking at things on a claircognizant level. They're able to go, okay, well, this person here has an energetic disruption in this section of the body. I can feel there's stress. I notice that there's stress in the body at the abdominal section, and the aura looks like it's clenched, and that implies stress and bowel problems. And over here, I see that this person has a lot of red in the aura, and their aura is almost like disfigured, where it looks like it's slightly wobbly, or when an aura is healthy, it's egg shape, whereas if an aura is kind of like inconsistent with the distance between front and back, side to side type thing, that can indicate health problems. And so they're looking at from not only a medical perspective, but a scientific one, a logical one that's really fixated on the knowledge and understanding of things. And I love that because it shows a strong interest and connection towards nature, and that's part of where I love that aspect of those type of beings. But when I look at the aspect where it's a little more disconnected from the emotional self, when you're raising starseeds, you have to recognize that their life in this incarnation will contain components of all their previous incarnations, which technically are all happening all at once because time doesn't exist the way we perceive it to. And so, because we look at the aspect of their past actually all happening now, these little star seeds are going to be going through their lifetime here so very different than what normal earth children would have, 20 years ago, or 40 years ago, or 60 years ago, because they are coming at things from a very different psychic perspective. They are coming at things from a more awakened understanding with a better remembrance of their contact, their soul origin, their real understanding of the universe. And so when I look at the way in which these children are all coming in and how we can better understand them, there's a couple things we have to take into consideration. Although I may not have the clear and distinct understanding of the reptilian aspect as much, of the mantis aspect as much, that doesn't mean other members of my family don't have a better sense of connection towards that child, which would be contributing factors for this child to choose to incarnate into a family through me, meaning be born through my body and of course come into the family and have the situations unfold as they wish to. Because before we're born, we determine, who's going to be a good parent for us? Do I like this person? That person? Do I like this bloodline? Do I like the fact that this family has contact or doesn't have contact? You really have to take these things into consideration, because if you were looking at the different families in place and you're starting to recognize, like, I'm here to really understand psychic abilities, and I'm here to help animals, like ocean animals, and to have a strong connection towards the water, and to really help heal the water and balance the water. But I need to be connected to my empathic abilities. That way I can grow and nurture my psychic abilities, in particular, empathic abilities and telepathic abilities, so that I can better communicate with dolphins and sea life. That way I can better work with them, heal them, and nurture the ocean. Then you're going to choose a family that is going to have contact, because you're going to want to have the telepathic experiences occurring from the time you're in utero through your childhood going into adulthood. But you're also going to probably choose a family that's more connected towards their psychic abilities one way or another, because you're going to want to have that understanding of your empathic gifts be able to be better recognized. And so I recognize why both of my children so far have chosen me, and also recognize why my two future children have chosen to be born to me in the next couple of years as well. Even though when I look at all four of them, I see such different and wonderful beings. I see the energy of Lyran and Orion with one child, and I notice that with the other child I'm seeing a lot more reptilian and Pleiadian and mantis energy around that child, and The child after that, I see a lot of Orion energy, and my other child after that feels more light being based, more focused on like a crystalline vibration, more of like a higher vibrational energy. And it's so interesting when you start to recognize the different vibratory frequencies coming out of your kids, especially on a soul level, because you start to pick up on their energies before they're born. And so, with each of my kids, it's not just a matter of being psychic that enables me to better connect into their frequency. It actually is a matter of me being willing to talk to them as well. So, I would do things like meditations where I would sit down and close my eyes and sometimes have binaural beats playing, or I would have things like 432 hertz or 528, things like that going on in the background. Classical music, sounds of water, or dolphin frequencies as well to help me get into those right vibratory states. But getting back to why that was necessary is it helped me to recognize the vibratory frequency and aura of each of my four children. And as I look at them, I do have a lot in common with a couple of them, and less so with some of the others. And that's okay because sometimes they're really liking components from one parent, but they also need components from the other parent to really balance them out for that incarnation. And so part of what's going on with me is even though I'm having a lot of encounters with the reptilians in this lifetime, getting to know different kinds of them, from the gray reptilians to the green, to the tanny colored ones, to the black ones, and even as far as the raptors, which is wonderful, having a child that has more of that reptilian heritage in place is giving me a better sense of understanding, empathy, compassion, and more of a willingness to look past some of the past life memories that I've had, where some of these other groups haven't necessarily been as kind to me, and to help to heal some of the past life trauma, help to release the energy in place there. So it has been very therapeutic towards me when it comes to that component. On the flip side, because I'm also not being terribly judgmental towards a lot of these races, and it's helping my child and myself to establish a deeper level of bond. For instance, if I have encounters with a specific reptilian race, I tell them, hey, guess what? I saw these guys, and this what happened, and I saw this kind of craft, and then we end up doing this. And do you understand it? I mean, I understand most of this part. I get why that happened. But why did they do this thing over here? Do you have any thoughts or feelings about that? I'm going to talk to my guides about it, but what do you think happened? And it opens up that dialogue between me and them to help us to have a better sense of understanding, communication, and a deeper degree of like empathy with one another. And the same thing can be said when that child encounters some of the beings that it doesn't quite understand, because these ones work more with me. Yelena asked me, Mommy, I saw this happen, and I don't know why they did this. Can you explain this to me? And sometimes I'm like, yeah, they did this for that reason, or they did this for this other reason. And other times I'm like, I don't know, I'm sorry. We can go ask your guides. And in which case, we will of course come into my reading room and meditate, then invite the guides in and talk to them and find out what happened. Or sometimes invite in our soul families and find out from them the reasoning behind other situations as well. And so it is actually helping to better heal the bloodlines, helping to release a lot of the trauma that has happened on some of the past life level, as well as healing some of the negative feelings and stereotypes that we have towards some of the other beings, because of course as our consciousness evolves and we start to get to know these beings in a different capacity, we can change our perspectives about some of the things that happened as well. Now this is wonderful, but when I look at some of the beings that have come to us over the years, it can be a little bit overwhelming. So, for instance, when my contact was picking up in 2014, and it was fine for most of my life because it was always at a manageable level. I'd see them maybe a couple times a month at best, and I didn't always recognize that it was extraterrestrials and multidimensionals I was dealing with. Sometimes they would present themselves as humans, or they would show themselves to be these funny looking beings that had like larger eyes. Sometimes they would show up as like straight grays, or like even just flat out raptors. And I was like, okay, well, whatever, that's just a weird dream. I didn't recognize they were contact back then. And so anyways, when my contacts started to really pick up to an even deeper level, because I asked the beings I worked with on every capacity, hey, can you stop just showing up in the auric form? Can you stop showing up as like this beautiful massive energy coming into my home? I love the sparkles, I love the streaks of light, I love seeing the auras walking around, but I want to see what you look like. What do you look like in the form that you're most comfortable? Can you please show that to me? Can you help me to be more aware of that? And when I did that, the floodgates bloody opened over the next couple of years because everything started showing me what they were most comfortable in. And sometimes I was kind of prejudiced towards it because I would have beings show up to me and they'd be showing themselves as some less than kind looking beings that sometimes had larger teeth and that looked kind of scary and intimidating, or just overall not what I was expecting. And of course, being human, we have preconceived notions and feelings about some of these things. And even though I could feel in an energetic capacity that they had no negative intention towards me, I was still being prejudiced and biased. And I didn't realize until I talked to my guides that what I was doing was a form of, it's almost like a form of like intergalactic, multi-dimensional racism that a lot of us actually end up doing. We believe like, oh, you're this, so you're good. Oh, you're that, so you're bad. When in actuality, it's definitely not that simple. It's not that black and white. And so I was in the bathroom one time. We lived in Vancouver, and I was bathing one of my kids, and I remember seeing this beautiful, energetic like type mass show up in my hallway, and I looked at it, and it's a mass I've worked with many, many times. When Archangel Michael comes into the space, it sometimes has like this cobalty blue, almost like this slight purplish essence to it, and he has a very distinct frequency. He feels very particular when you feel him. For me, he feels like sunshine kind of cascading on my body, very warm, very love based. It actually feels quite nice. And there's no sense of like threateningness around him. It feels almost like a protective big brother or like father figure type energy coming into the space. And I remember just talking to him just telepathically while I was bathing my child and asking, are my kids, are we safe? Is this okay for us to be having all of these beings coming in? Is it okay that we have this portal at the top of our stairs? Are we okay because there was a vortex that opened up in my room? Are we going to be all right with these orbs coming in and out? Like, I'm not sure how to feel about all of this. Because it's one thing when the majority of your encounters when you were a kid are you walking out of the house, whether it's your sliding glass door, your front door, and walking with beings and being escorted on that capacity out towards craft, and it being the same beings over and over that you're seeing, to suddenly having a whole bunch of new beings coming to work with you and interacting with you and your babies, because that will cause anyone to just stop and be like, oh, okay, is this all right? Are we fine? And he said it was all right, that they were going to do a lot of protective stuff for us and help to keep us in a better place. And I was very grateful for that. But a little while later, I think it was like a week or a few weeks later, I'd have to check my diaries to double check, but I was in my kids' room and we were laying in their bed and I was reading them a couple stories before they were going to sleep that night. I remember seeing this really funny thing happened. We're laying back and we're like this, and we're on our pillows and whatnot, and I've got one kid here and one kid here, and I'm holding a book, and all of a sudden I feel this like energetic shift in the room, and I look up towards the door, and there's this like ethereal looking tall bipedal tiger type being there. I'm looking like, okay, tall white tiger stripes, kind of like somehow has like a rainbowy essence going through it. And I didn't say anything, like I'm still partially reading, this is a book that I read so many times I had it memorized. And I look at my kids and they're both looking at the book, and I notice my one child look up at it, and she just kind of had like this very playful, like love-based energy. And I see this Lyran being go from being that form to looking like a tiger form that's now walking across the room and coming towards her. And I recognized as this was happening, I was seeing clairvoyantly, interdimensionally, the form that is this child's primary guardian for this lifetime. It's kind of like a spirit guide, but not quite. This is a being that's part of her soul family. And so, what it was a little confusing to me at first. I'm like, why is there a big cat? Why is it like a human cat? Well, what's with that? And why is it going to be another cat? Not realizing that it's taking on a form that's more comfortable for me on my level of perception based on where I was in my development at that time. And so I was going, and I was going like, what's going on? I don't get it, but I'm still reading the book. And so I remember knowing that my children were safe, I got them all tucked into bed and ended up leaving the room, because I remember noticing the being coming towards us, but I didn't really see it stay. It kind of felt like it came and then kind of went transparent and almost like it disappeared type thing. And so when I talked to my guides about it, they explained it was a Lyran. I'm like, how is that a Lyran? I'm like, Lyrans are human. I know Lyrans are like, they're like human. They're taller than us humans, but they're like 6, 7 feet tall. Coming from a 5 foot tall person, that seems tall. But anyways, and they're like, yeah, but Sam, they're more than just humans that came from Lyra. Lyra has multiple planets there. Lyra has some planets that have these cat beings and other planets that have human beings and some that have cats and human beings. And I was like, oh, okay, that makes sense. But it hadn't occurred to me in 2014 that that was something that would be happening. Because at that time, I was fixated more on a lot of the multi-dimensional component. I was focusing on a lot more of the angelic energies for the like 5 or so years leading up to that point. Um, Even at that point, I think it was like 2007, somewhere in like 6, 7, I started to really get quite heavily focused on mostly the angelic component, getting to know all the different angelic beings I worked with. And after I really got to know the angelic beings for a few years, I moved over to more of my spirit guides and the elemental kingdom and getting to know my ancestors, things like that. And so it's been a gradual progression of getting to know all the different beings. And what confused me after this situation was I realized, okay, that being felt like family. It didn't feel like my family, but it felt like my daughter's family. And I remember as my children got older, I didn't talk to her about what I had seen. I didn't really ask her anything about that. But I started to get to know this being, and I really like Sapphire. She has a very wonderful energy to her. But as I started to get to know her, she would often end up bringing these little type Lyran cat beings with her. And my children actually started to be able to see them. They recognized those. They recognized these other beings that appeared to be part, what my son called dragon puppies, because they appeared to be part dragon or reptilian and part dog, not realizing these were hybrid type beings that were joined together, almost like they contained the genetics of some sort of dog type race as well as a reptilian type race. And so as I really started to get to know the different types of beings out there and really started to get to know the diversity of beings that could be working with somebody based upon what their soul has experienced, I started to get a better idea that my children, although we had a couple of lifetimes and locations that we have overlapped, that they had chosen me to be their mother to help them remember this information. And so whenever my kids had an encounter or they saw something really interesting, I said, okay, go write it down. Let's go draw a picture. Come show me draw for me what it is you saw. Draw the beings, draw Sapphire. How she looked to you? What are you seeing with her? And at first I would see this really like interesting, like, you gotta remember, like 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds could not draw very well. And so I would look and I'd see these like really kind of scratchy looking cat with stripes, and I'm like, okay, she's drawing like the rainbow stripes, so she's seeing the rainbow energy, that's fine. And then I started to notice after like a while, because at first when I did see Sapphire, it was just her by herself, and it was a while later that she started doing these other cats around, these little ones, and recognizing that these are her children that were coming near my daughter because of her energy frequency, because these children were related to her on a soul level, and that her genetics in place are partially related to that. And so with my son, it was something very, very similar. He started to draw these dinosaurs that he was seeing, these reptiles, and he would draw the dragon puppies. And I didn't mind, because when I talked to my guides about it and they explained that these beings had no negative intention towards my children, these were simply part of their soul family, it started to really make it so I felt more comfortable. I didn't feel as much anxiety and stress about my kids having these encounters. I didn't really worry about it as much because I realized that they were safe and it was okay. Pardon me. The other thing that I really noticed with all this is when it came to stuff like the mantis beings coming around, sometimes that threw me off. Like it really digs when you have a child that has allergies. Like when my son was younger, he had a lot of allergies. And thank goodness a lot of the beings we work with did a lot of healing on him. They've been very good about taking care of our bodies and everything else. But for most of us, especially like because when I was growing up, I don't recall seeing mantises when I was little. It wasn't until I started to go through the hybridization program and really started to have more of my filters and screen memories taken off that I started to really perceive them and see them in their true form. And so when I would have encounters happen, especially physical encounters, where my son would have something he was allergic to and be up crying for hours, and you'd eventually like fall asleep, and then you'd wake up in the middle of the night to there being a completely different energetic vibration in the room. And so for those of you who have had contact, you recognize what it feels like when there's a craft above your house. How it feels like the air is alive, it's tingling, it's so different than what the normal atmosphere and energy feels like in our homes. And so I woke up this one time and I started to notice that there was an energy presence in the room with us, and it was kind of like off to my left, and my son was on this side, my daughter's on this side, because he was having such like bad tummy pains, and as they were trying to like help his tummy feel better, I fell asleep doing Reiki to him. I had called upon every being that I work with. I called in angels, archangels, ancestors, the extraterrestrials, and multidimensionals that we work with to come forward to provide healing and relief to my child who was in pain. And so when I had awoken in the night, there was this mantis being hovering in the bed, or not in the bed, pardon me, above the bed in the room with us. And she was very kind, very sweet. She had this very almost like melodious type voice to her. And she said, "Go back to sleep, Samantha Mowat." And even though I could tell that she was right there, she was kind of like leaning over the bed like that to my child, and it was kind of towards me, it felt like she was being very kind. I could feel healing energy radiating throughout the room. And this wasn't my Reiki energy. This wasn't my hands of light or quantum touch energy that I would be doing. This felt like a lot more powerful. This felt almost like it was energy cascading down and pouring through her into him. And it was because they have done a lot of stuff like this to him that he no longer has any allergies at all. He went from having like, oh God, like 12, 15 allergies. I'd have to like check our journals and medical records to see what it was, but he has nothing. Less than 10 years later, absolutely zero. And so I've recognized that it's the beings that he has a connection to on a soul level that are doing these things for him, that have helped him when it comes to those levels of healing. And I've recognized that not everyone gets that. But one thing I have learned over the years is that it's very important to ask. What a really dear person to me who passed away several years ago ended up teaching me, that I think was one of the greatest pieces of advice I've ever gotten, is no is always an acceptable answer, but you should ask. And if there is something you want, you should ask for it. You may not get it. You should definitely ask for it, especially with something like healing. And you know, one thing that I've found over the years is I've had a lot of people come to me over the last like 10 years since I've been out in the public about what I do for a living, not only working as a psychic, but also helping people when it comes to understanding the multidimensional and extraterrestrial component of things, is that I don't understand why all the beings are not willing to step in when people are asking. But you are able to ask your soul family for help. You can ask your angels and your guides for help, for yourself, for the people that you're close to. They may not be willing or able to help, but you should definitely help, because you might get some incredible healings. Even this week, it's kind of funny because I actually was starting to get really sick. I started to have bronchitis symptoms coming again, and I called all the beings that I have worked with in the past, and I said, "Hey, I'm not feeling well. I can feel my lungs. My lungs feel like they're burning. They feel like they're sore. They feel like they're heavy." And I normally get those kind of symptoms before I get things like bronchitis. And so I ended up going to sleep, and I started, it's funny because I woke up a few hours later and I saw these three boys that were in the room with me. And normally you see things that are kind of like ridiculous. It can be an indication of a screen memory, like three clowns or two bears, or your deceased grandmother over your bed, things like that. Pretty common. But I ended up seeing three boys that I knew, and one, of course, my son, and two of his good friends. And if I had stopped to think about it, I'd think, okay, well, one kid lives 20 minutes that way, another one's 10 minutes that way. They're probably not in my room in the middle of the night to help take me somewhere else. And so when I started having that happen, I didn't recognize the screen memory in place until I woke up the next morning and I felt better and my lungs didn't hurt, and I was able to keep doing work because the beings had come to help heal. And so because I've started to establish a deeper relationship with my children's guides and some of the beings that they work with, from the mantis beings to different reptilian beings to certain beings from Orion, it has actually enabled me to grow on a soul level, but it's also enabling them to grow as well, because I work with different beings than they do. They have a different exposure rate than they would have otherwise if they were born to someone who didn't have the same degree of contact taking place. If they were born to someone who wasn't aware of their contact, they might be more dismissive of what's going on. And that is so exciting that I was given the opportunity to be given the chance to be their mama, and I love that. But I want for all of you to get to know your contact, get to know your soul's history, write down all the places that your soul feels a connection to. So you might be the early part of awakening. You might be like, well, I don't know where I've had past lives, and I don't know where I've been, and I just don't know. In which case, let's just do us a favor. Over the next week, go somewhere, buy a journal, and I want you to write down places that you kind of feel a connection to. So before I really went through a lot of my awakening stuff, like stuff I felt more of a connection to when I was a kid, I've recognized that I had lived in ancient Greece, and I've recognized a connection towards Pompeii. And it wasn't until I had met um, my husband that I realized, oh, I've recognized Pompeii, and I remember the fact that I died in Pompeii, and I died when I was near you because I promised I would never leave you while the volcano was erupting and stuff like that. And, I started to be like, oh, that makes sense. That explains why I had that dream over and over and over as a kid. And then I would remember movies I felt really connected to when I was younger, whether it was like the witch trial movies that were in like the early 2000s, or when I would watch things like E.T. when I was a kid, be like, huh, I swear I'm gonna have like a lot of contact with that. We're beings where it's like we're in each other's spaces and we're able to really talk and touch and things like that, and I have, which is great. But I also started to take into consideration other places I felt really drawn to. I started to actually really get to know how the different areas that I felt connected to were indications of past life recognition coming forward in this body. And because I did that, it helped me to be able to have those discussions with my kids. So we could be watching a movie about something, could be anything. It could be a movie about fairies, for instance. Like when my kids were little and watching Tinkerbell movies, I was saying, guys, fairies are real. They're very real beings, but they don't look like Tinkerbell. That's not an accurate depiction of what they look like. And so I would talk to my kids about what the fairies that I have seen have looked like and what the elementals look like, things like that, helping them to get a better idea. But also when my kids would really feel terrified of something, whether it's like fire or water or whatever the heck it is, I would ask them, okay, well, why are you afraid of that? What's going on here? Why are you feeling this connection towards this? And sometimes they would get anxious and they'd play with their hair, or they'd play with like their body and clothes, and I'd get them to stop and come and stop and be like, why are you afraid of this? And they'd be like, it feels like something it's gonna happen again. I'd be like, oh, happen again? Well, honey, you haven't had that in this lifetime, so you feel like something happened in a past life? And in which case, I would just write down their baby book of, hey, had a fear of this. And as they really get to know those energies and you talk to them about as they get bigger, sometimes kids will start to remember, hey, I saw in my previous life deaths, or I saw myself being hanged or hunted, or I saw myself in a house fire, or whatever it is. And so just by acknowledging with them that you can start to remember your past lives and really talk to them about that, it can help them with it as well, especially when we're dealing with starseeds, because a lot of starseeds haven't had lifetimes here. For especially the newer ones, they're having their first incarnations on this planet. I mean, oh my goodness, can you imagine how stressful that would be? Your first time being here and you're dealing with like year 2000 onwards. I mean, that is not giving Earth a good show. It's really not. It's a pretty stressful time. And so instead, we'll end up watching movies that are more based upon things like science fiction or fantasy. They'll be like, hey, this reminds me of a planet that I remember from around here. And I'll be like, okay, well, what planet? Can you tell me more about that? And so really getting them to write out and draw out things that they remember on a soul level is beneficial as well, because you might not be able to recognize where your kid is from at first. For instance, my daughter's had lifetimes in Sirius, and I didn't realize that when she was little. And I didn't quite understand that because when I was shown the Sirius star system or being shown dolphins around her, I thought, oh, okay, cool. She's lived somewhere like Hawaii. And she has, but that's not the point. I didn't recognize the fact that she was having these dolphin beings and like whale beings come around her because she was having lifetimes in Sirius before here. And so, because we're all still learning about all the different star races that are out there and the diversity of life in this universe, there's a lot going on. And we're all still very new to that kind of geography and the different cultures. And because of that, that's why I recommend writing it down, drawing it out. Where are you feeling connected to? What kinds of atmospheres, climates, really getting to know it? I think stuff like that is really important because when we start to get to know that information, it actually gives us a better sense of who we are and can be very calming for the soul as well because you recognize the patterns and everything else. And it's a really great way to get to know you and to get to know them to help make you a better parent. And speaking of parenting, I need to go tuck my little ones in because I've been letting them read for about 45 minutes now. So I think it's probably enough time before bed. But I wish you peace, love, and light, and it's great to talk to you. I'll talk to you again soon. Bye.